Welcome. This talk is sponsored by the Yale Center for Environmental Communication at the Yale School of the Environment. Based at Yale University School of the Environment, the Center for Environmental Communication, or YCEC for short, we focus on four areas. We conduct research on the psychological, cultural, and political factors that influence environmental attitudes and behavior. We teach students and train working professionals. We convene a global network of climate communication scholars and practitioners. And finally, we inform and engage the public through environmental journalism, including Yale Climate Connections, a climate-focused news service that engages many thousands of people every day and includes a short daily radio story of just 90 seconds that airs on more than 700 stations nationwide. Here at the Yale Program on Climate Change Communication, we conduct our own experiments and we work with partners to understand which strategies and tactics best engage different audiences in the US and abroad. In our partnership work with Neighbours United in BC, Canada, we've been impressed by the results of using deep canvassing on climate change. You may know of our segmentation, Global Warming's 6 Americas. Let me pull that slide up for you here. Which finds that there are 6 different groups in the US who think about climate change in different ways. One of the groups in the middle, the cautious, are those who haven't yet made up their minds. Is global warming happening? Is it human caused? Is it serious? The cautious, they make up 17% of US adults, which is about 60 million people. As you learn more about deep canvassing on this webinar, you might think of the potential of using it to have climate conversations with those 60 million US adults. If you are an organization looking for support in your communications, please reach out to our partnerships team at ypccc.partners@yale.edu. As far as the logistics for this webinar, the chat is closed. Please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You will only be able to see your own questions, but we will be reviewing all questions. We will make a recording of this conversation available on our website, and we will send a link to everyone who registered. Today's talk will be moderated by Joshua Kalla. Dr. Kalla, he's an associate professor of political science here at Yale University, and he also has a secondary appointment in statistics and data science. He received his PhD in political science from the University of California, Berkeley. His research studies political persuasion, prejudice, reduction, and decision-making amongst voters and political elites, primarily through the use of randomized field experiments. I hand it over to you, Dr. Kalla.
Thank you so much, Eric, and thank you all for joining us on this first Friday in December. So today's webinar is about deep canvassing, and we're going to be hearing a lot about deep canvassing from Steve in Montana. But to briefly set the stage, deep canvassing is a type of conversation where a door-to-door canvasser is trying to persuade someone. They're trying to change their mind, but they do so by being curious, by listening non-judgmentally, and sharing personal stories from their lives. And deep canvassing conversations are meant to be two-way conversations where an individual is talking with someone rather than at someone. And in my academic research, I've conducted over a half dozen experimental evaluations of deep canvassing. And in this research, I consistently find that this technique of deep canvassing reduces prejudice and changes individuals' views on policies on topics as varied as LGBTQ+ rights, immigration, and abortion. And in these studies, we also find that this type of canvassing, this deep canvassing, is much more effective than traditional canvassing, traditional persuasion approaches. So if you can think of two ends of the spectrum where deep canvassing is at one end, most of political canvassing really relies on talking points, facts, arguments, and talking at someone. And what I tend to find is that those types of argumentations, those types of canvases have no meaningful effect on changing people's minds, while deep canvassing does seem to have large and long-lasting effects on these highly salient, highly divisive topics. So I'm really excited to host this webinar with two of the leading practitioners on deep canvassing. We're first going to be hearing from Steve Deline. Steve is the co-founder of the New Conversation Initiative and has worked as part of the groundbreaking Leadership Lab team, helping to develop the original deep canvas conversation model. In 2012, Steve embedded with the Minnesotans United Marriage Equality Campaign as a regional field director, which resulted in a victory that many thought was impossible. Steve is deeply passionate about the superpowers of vulnerability and non-judgmental curiosity that we all carry within us, and the political and personal transformations that occur when we use those powers to bridge fear and difference. And after we hear from Steve, we're going to be hearing from Montana Burgess and her team at Neighbours United successfully worked with Steve and his team at the New Conversation Initiative to win a clean energy policy in the heavy industry company town of Trail, British Columbia in Canada, using deep canvassing as a tactic. This 2022 campaign meant Neighbours United was the first group to run a successful deep canvassing volunteer program on climate and energy that successfully changed a policy outcome. Neighbours United and Montana Burgess have new learnings from other climate, energy, and conservation deep canvasses that they're going to share with us today. And they're really committed to sharing their learnings to scale partnerships in both Canada and the United States. So let me hand it over to Steve first to set the stage on deep canvassing.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you everyone for joining today. It's wonderful to be here. Oops, sharing the wrong screen. Let's share the right screen. It's wonderful to be here and to see you all. Again, my name is Steve Deline. My pronouns are he, him, and his. And I would love to start us off as someone who got to be a part of developing deep canvassing in the LGBT rights movement in the thick of a fight that was really impactful for my own life as a young gay person, and has since gotten to be a part of organizing around deep canvassing on a whole variety of issues for the last 14 years. I'm excited to really set up our conversation about how deep canvassing can be applied in climate work by talking and setting the stage around where deep canvassing comes from, why it looks the way it looks, which will be helpful for us understanding how we can think about it in the climate space. So just to reiterate, what is deep canvassing? When we are having a deep canvas conversation, we are striving to shift people's underlying emotions and beliefs in order to change how people think and behave and decide on salient issues in a lasting way, not just for a short period, but for the long haul. And the reason deep canvassing exists, the origin of this approach, is a moment of desperation in the LGBT rights movement. So this seems hard to imagine now, but there was a time when marriage equality did not seem like a possibility here in the United States, when same-sex marriage didn't seem in reach. And in specifically 2008 in California, we had a vote on marriage equality called Proposition 8. And going into the election day, 60% of people polled as being with us, as being in favor of marriage equality, and 40% of people polled as being against us. And our movement mobilized one of the largest numbers of volunteers for a campaign ever, raised extraordinary amounts of money, ran a really powerful campaign. And then on election day, despite all that polling, 54% of people voted against us. We lost by significant margins, including in Los Angeles, including in large parts of the Bay Area. And not only was this a huge loss, it was the 28th straight loss on marriage equality in the US. We had voted on marriage equality in different places 28 times, and we had never won. And that was really a moment of reckoning for our movement. It was really a moment where we had to realize that something was happening for people that we didn't understand, and that there was no way around these things. There was no way around a lack of support. There was no way around the conflicted voters who were being pulled away from us. We had to figure out a way through and to engage with these people and to change hearts and minds. And one of the things that came out of that realization was an experimental project that was run out of the Los Angeles LGBT Center to have a small team of organizers start recruiting volunteers to go door to door and have conversations with the people who had voted against us, which is not something that the LGBT movement had ever done before. Canvassing had always been used as a tool to identify our supporters and turn them out to vote. So we did actually talk for the first time to the folks who were voting against us. And really, it was a giant experiment. We did not know what we were doing. We did not have a clear sense of what to do. But it was us asking ourselves, okay, is it possible to talk to these folks? Is it possible for us to be honest with one another? And is it possible to decrease homophobia and persuade? Is it actually possible to change hearts and minds? It began a 2-year process of trial and error on the doors, and seeing and finding a way through, and starting to do an enormous amount of learning once we discovered that there was a giant lane open to have conversations that were persuasive, how to do that in a consistent and structured way that anyone could take part in. And we started to learn some things that really surprised us and ran against our assumptions. So I can talk till I'm blue in the face about the things that we learned, but I would actually prefer to just show you. I would love to show you a video of one of the first conversations that we recorded on the doors, where we started to say, aha, like, this is not what we've been doing, but it is what we should be doing. We're starting to see what the path here is. So this is a video of an organizer on the team named Jackson Darling, an amazing guy who is doing great work to this day in this space. And he is having a conversation with a voter who, after the Prop 8 election and after the loss, says that he didn't vote on Prop 8. And maybe he's being honest about that. Also, we know from the data in that election that there was a vanishingly small amount of ballot drop-off. So it's more likely that he did vote, but he voted against us and just doesn't quite feel comfortable saying so. So this is a edited clip of about a 12-minute conversation. We're going to see about 2.5 minutes of it, of Jackson canvassing with this voter. And as we're watching this, I would love you to ask yourself, what is Jackson doing as the canvasser in this interaction? What is he spending his time doing? What choices is he making? And what is the impact you see that having on this voter? So let me get us over to our video here.
We're talking to folks about marriage for gay and lesbian couples. Do you remember that being on the ballot in 2008? Okay.
Prop 8?
Yeah, and do you remember how you voted on it?
We didn't vote.
You didn't vote. Okay. What would you say is on the side for you that's holding you back from supporting it? I'm just trying to understand better.
Basically, I kind of didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to make the wrong choice.
Yeah, sure. You want to do the right thing.
Now you're making me think about this. I happen to have a cousin who's lesbian that I love very much. Mm-hmm. And she's been with another woman for about 20 years.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
So I don't have any prejudice towards that.
What's your cousin's name?
Her name is Jill.
Jill. Okay. Yeah. So it seems like Jill would be real happy, right, if she could get married.
They'd like to, especially they're going through financial troubles.
Yeah, it's helpful.
And I believe this stuff, see, I get emotional about this.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Well, it seems like it's really hard decision.
Well, when it comes to health issues and stuff.
What? I'm just curious. Why does it, make you feel so emotional?
Because right now you can't do things for each other.
Yeah. That's gotta be really hard. I
Sorry.
You how much you love and care for them, and for a lot of folks, it's about protecting this sort of idea of man, woman, and things like that. But for us, it's about protecting each other.
Yeah, you told me, and when you bring that stuff up, and I realized that about my cousins, as much as I love them and stuff. I don't know that I take it in internally as much.
Yeah.
That's like you're saying about voting. Why didn't I? And now. Because it wasn't something that was really super personal to me.
Sure. We're going to be voting on this again in the future. What do you think would be the right thing to do?
I would vote for gays to be able to legally get married.
And why does that feel right to you?
Because I think if two people love each other, they loved each other, as we're couples. Yeah. And I respect that.
Okay, I know we can't hear each other, but can we get a silent round of applause for Jackson and his great work as the canvasser in that conversation? So normally I'd love to unpack this a little bit with folks. We can't do that. We're too many folks today, but I would love to just, pose the question as you're digesting that interaction. First off, let me say that the measure of success in every conversation is not making a voter cry. That's not our bar for what success looks like. But as you watch this, do you feel like this conversation made a persuasive impact on this voter? And if so, why? What happened in that interaction that you think was persuasive? And as we pondered that question and tried to answer that question for ourselves, as we started to understand what was working on the doors, what became really clear to us is that people make up their minds based on emotions, not facts or information. All the messages and data and facts that we were trying to start throwing at people initially in our conversations right off the bat to allay their concerns, to change their minds, facts that were definitive proof to us of our rightness, just caused people to entrench themselves more deeply. All those facts got rejected and pushed right away, because it became clear to us that a fact battle wasn't what people were wrestling with. People were wrestling with a deeply emotional battle and conflict. This was happening, these decisions were happening in their guts, not in their brains. And so then what we found is that lasting persuasion that sticks and resists later exposure to opposition messaging, is about helping people resolve emotional conflict on that gut level and the cognitive dissonance and conflicts that they are feeling and wrestling with all the time. And this is true of all of us. We all make our decisions up. We like to think of ourselves as rational, information-based humans, when in fact we are all making our decisions on a really gut emotional level, and then going out and finding the facts and information that validate the emotional decision that we've already made. That's how we go about resolving the conflicts and cognitive dissonance that we experience around all kinds of difficult issues. So with that core insight in hand, we started to crystallize sort of this different approach to having conversations across difference, where we wanted to change hearts and minds, and to kind of sum up the changes we learned to make. Whereas in a traditional canvas, we were accustomed to getting an ID, right? Just getting folks plotted as yes, no, maybe. Are they supportive or not? Are they with us or against us? In a deep canvas, we learned that our goal, our primary objective, was to surface complexity. So instead of a yes, no, maybe, we started asking folks on a 0 to 10 scale, how do you feel about this issue? Where folks had a lot of room to express nuance and complicated feelings, and a giant invitation from us, an expression of our interest in understanding their complicated feelings. Then, in a traditional canvas, we most often train canvassers to use a script. That's kind of the measure of success of our canvasser preparation, is can they use the script? In a deep canvas, there's a script that's a powerful roadmap, and we need canvassers to use it. But our primary goal is to train canvassers to listen and be curious and ask questions. And in a traditional canvas, ultimately a measure of success is to deliver a message successfully. Whereas in a deep canvas, our biggest measure of success is the voter and the canvasser exchanging vulnerable stories with one another. And so as we then crystallize this into a replicable method for having conversation around marriage equality, two things started to happen. We both started to apply it at scale. So this approach was used in 2012 and scaled up in statewide campaigns to have many tens of thousands of people have these persuasive conversations. They weren't yet called deep canvassing, to help turn the tide on marriage equality. And it's been a big part of how we won in places and in spaces that were thought to be unwinnable, and then turned the tide on that issue. And then at the same time, we also began working with outside researchers to more deeply and rigorously measure the impact of these conversations. So most prominently, Josh Kalla right here, who's with us today, and his colleague David Broockman began running randomized controlled trials to understand what really is the impact of these conversations in a kind of double-blind way, where voters don't realize they're being measured, and we have placebo comparisons and all these things. And what we have found across a whole variety of experiments on multiple issues is that these conversations, deep canvas conversations, are having a large persuasive effect. So as a quick sampling, this is a graph of kind of the impact on margin of support on different issues that deep canvas conversations have been found to have. Anywhere from 8% to 20% of the people we've contacted have moved really significantly on issues from trans rights to immigration. So there's this large persuasive impact that's really unusual, but also it is inoculative impact. So folks that we have been able to deep canvas have also their additional support, changed hearts and minds, have remained resistant to later exposure to opposition fear messaging and disinformation. And then we have found that in most of these experiments, that change is found to be lasting. So as long as these research teams have been able to continue measuring for 6 months or 9 months or more, often as long as they had the money to keep going, those impacts stayed strong. People stayed persuaded. And so these are really unusual again. Like persuasion is really difficult, and most of the things we try to do to persuade either don't work or have only fleeting impacts. And this is a really outlier effect. So then we've begun to examine how can this approach be applied to other movements, other spaces, other issues. We've continued to find that it's applicable in a broad variety of ways. And kind of the pillars, the consistent thing we found about the core foundation of building one of these programs and doing it successfully is that we have a script that acts as a roadmap for having vulnerable conversations. We build a team culture that provides canvassers, whether they're paid canvassers or volunteers, with support in multiple ways. These conversations can come with an emotional burden depending on the issue and how you're impacted by an issue. It's really important to build a team culture that creates intentional structures of support that can hold people through that. Strong training programs that invest in building our listening muscles and our curiosity muscles that we don't flex in day-to-day life. And then data systems that track impact and track the effectiveness of what we're doing as opposed to just the effort we put in. So track more than just number of knocks, number of dials, but it actually track and allow us to evaluate the impact we're making. And the last point I want to make is just around this idea of the script as a roadmap for personal conversation. The essential first step in the process of developing a deep canvas program is something we call script iteration, which is really a process of talking to the people we hope to move, learning what they are actually feeling, and having a lot of our own assumptions challenged and busted. And that's actually, it's a really essential process step to creating a powerful deep canvas program and a powerful script. But actually what we've learned over time is it's a movement opportunity that's goes beyond just building the deep canvas program, because what it yields is powerful learning from the field about where folks actually are that often we miss. And it shifts through mindsets and our own assumptions that we often come in with and that can shape in unhelpful ways how we approach outreach, persuasion, connecting with folks. So this is now kind of a growing field of work, and there are a lot of people working in different movements on different issues that are learning from one another, and a lot of this learning is feeding into each other. And this climate work that Montana is about to talk about is, to me, one of the most powerful examples and iterations where this has been applied. We've had the opportunity to work with Montana and her team to do some amazing stuff. And for my money, they are one of the most important deep canvas practitioners that are operating right now and are poised to make an even bigger difference. So I'm very excited to introduce Montana Burgess to take it from here.
Thank you, Steve. As we transition to Montana in the spirit of deep canvassing, please answer this quick question.
Shall I jump in, or do you want to give folks a minute on the poll?
Go for it while we wrap that up.
Okay, great. I'm just gonna set up my share here. All right, hi everyone. I am thrilled to be here today. Some of my favorite people and some of the smartest people I know I get to present alongside of, so I feel very humbled. Thank you to Yale Program on Climate Change Communication for hosting us. My name is Montana Burgess. I use she or they pronouns, and today I'm coming to you from the unceded land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations, also known as Vancouver, BC. I'm here for a few days, but normally I'm on the land of the Snakes people, which is in the West Kootenay area of British Columbia. For all you Americans on this call, it's directly north of Spokane. So come visit, get into Spokane, drive north, cross the border, and there we are. I run an organization called Neighbours United. And as mentioned, we've been working on deep canvassing for about 4 years now in climate and environmental applications. So I wanted to just share a little bit about myself. This is the area I live in. It's stunning. It's beautiful. Come hiking, come skiing. We love you to come. And apologies for my friend's dog in the background barking. I grew up in a place kind of similar to this called Kamloops in British Columbia, and it is a semi-arid grassland. So very dry, very deserty. There's rattlesnakes, there's cactus, all those things. And growing up there was wildfires periodically because it's a grassland. It needs to burn to regenerate. And in that grassland ecosystem that I grew up in, there was only a handful of days in my childhood where the sun was pink and it was too smoky to go out and play. Only a handful. One of the reasons I moved to the West Kootenays is it's an interior rainforest, so it's a lot wetter, and I didn't love the dryness of Kamloops. So when I moved to this area about 12 years ago, it looked like this. And then over time, it's looked more and more like this. And like this for a month and a half, it can be like this. And last summer on my little air quality app, it has like the hazmat face that the person has, the person's wearing for weeks. And it's very scary, not for the, just feeling like this, but I have a child who is now 6. And when she was 2 years old, she was at home with a cold, trying to fall asleep one night, and her breathing was very erratic and weird. And, new parent, what do? You call 911 a lot because you don't know what to do. And so I did that, and they came and they were like, her oxygen can't be this low. This is off the charts low. So they got her on oxygen. We went to the emergency room, and it turns out she was having an asthma attack. She's asthmatic. We didn't know. So we got her on the medication, the puffers, and she got stabilized. She's okay. But now every year in the smoky season, which can last for over a month, I'm terrified. As a parent, I want to protect her. That's like my number one job. Keep her safe, make sure she has clean air to breathe, clean water to drink, and healthy food to eat and shelter overhead. And I can't keep her safe from the air. So in these days like this, I keep her inside. I have the air purifiers on. It's very, very scary. And last year, I had the privilege to be able to evacuate us to the Lower Mainland, where I am now, actually to this house, to my friend's house, to stay here when the hazmat icon was going. And I don't know how we fix this, but I know we got to keep going. And I know that we got to do it together. And sometimes it feels too late, but we got to keep going because it's only going to get worse if we don't do it better. And I got to do it for my kid. I got to know I did everything I can. So that's why I'm in this work. And this is a picture of her in the hospital on oxygen. No one wants to see this. We want her healthy and out playing. And I want her to have the childhood I had, where it wasn't too smoky, too many days to go out and play. So why am I sharing this? This is what's at stake for me. And I know you probably all have stories like that of things that are at stake for you and loved ones that maybe need to breathe, that can't breathe when there is wildfire impacts or whatever the climate impact is that it's affecting you. So in Trail, British Columbia, this is a town in my region, and we had been doing a campaign to try to get all of the local governments across the region committed to the 100% renewable energy transition as a way of taking climate action in our own backyards. And we had been doing this campaign for years, using standard good community organizing, identifying supporters, turning them out to show their support. And then councils would pass the motion because a majority of their constituents supported this policy. Well, in Trail, we started doing those things. We'd go to farmers markets, community events, on the street, talk to people. And really quickly, we couldn't identify enough supporters. We maxed out around 150, and we just couldn't get people to add their name in support of this clean energy transition policy. So I had heard about deep canvassing from a podcast from This American Life and frantically Googled Steve and New Conversation Initiative and got connected. And really quickly realized this tactic is something we needed in a town like Trail to actually change hearts and minds. There was only 8,000 people in the town, which, it's actually not that many people. And this town was so conflicted because there's a smelter in the center of downtown. You can see it right here in this lower picture. And it's a classic jobs versus environment situation where people feel like they can't take any environmental action or climate action because there's this one employer in town who is so important to their livelihoods and to the way they've been living for decades. So this is where we decided to test deep canvassing. And our policy goal was to get the city council to pass a resolution to transition to 100% renewable energy across all community energy uses. So ambitious, but also very localized. And as I said, we just couldn't find enough support. So we knew we had to do something different. So we started working with the new conversation initiative. We took lessons learned from the Montana Engagement Partnership that did some deep canvassing around conservation issues and working with folks in Montana. My name's Montana, just trying to find like-minded Montanas, I guess. We worked with our friends at the Yale program on climate change communication to help with our script iteration. Got our folks trained through the Deep Canvassing Institute, which Steve is going to tell you a little bit more about when I'm done talking here, and some pollsters at McAllister Opinion Research to help us figure out how to get into the conversation. We started knocking on doors, a lot of doors, and listening. And what we heard from voters is they were overwhelmed by the scope of climate change. They didn't trust governments. They didn't trust environmentalists. They didn't think solutions were possible. Climate change didn't feel urgent for them. They were a little bit concerned about financial costs, but that was pretty surface. And then, as we've heard in many other deep canvasses as well, if we're talking about a specific clean energy fight, they just hadn't heard about it. It's not on their radar. So these are the things that we knew we needed to figure out how to overcome. And so there was three kind of key pieces to a deep canvas that we needed to develop. We needed a script that worked as a roadmap, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about now. We needed a training program to help our canvassers flex a few key skills. And then we needed to build a team and culture that supported and healed canvassers so they could keep coming back and having these hard conversations sometimes to have it at the scale we needed. And so what we learned is our conversations needed to have three key ingredients in this pilot. We needed to be able to share what was at stake for us in climate change and how we were experiencing climate change right now. We needed to draw out their lived experience in impacts of climate change and how that made them feel. And then we needed to be able to tell a story of pollution, which is, related to climate change, tell a story about pollution getting solved. And this was really relevant in Trail. So at the beginning of when I started talking, I shared my climate change stakes story. I told you about what was at stake for me. And then what we would do in the conversation is we'd ask the person what that brought up for them after we shared first and help guide them into what was at stake for them. And before all this is like in Trail has an became famous, and I first heard about Trail in the 1980s because the lead poisoning levels were off the charts and children were getting very sick and dying. And the community had to do something about that. So enough people came together and pressured the government and the industry to work together to figure out how to solve this. And so there was a kind of a community roundtable created, and the lead levels have dropped dramatically in Trail. They're not gone, but they're much, much, much lower. They monitor them very regularly, and you can see the effect. And we would ask people like how things have changed in the community. They would point to the hills and say, there used to not be trees on those hills, and now there's trees. I used to not be able to go in the soil in my backyards, and now it's been remediated and we can grow veggies again. So Trail is actually a frontline community that has resolved a big environmental challenge. And so we would use that to say, well, this happened. You've all told us this. So now we think the challenge around pollution and waste is climate change. And I think we can solve that because we did it once before in another way right here in our community. And so then when we would share our story, like I did earlier, we would have a few key elements. We would draw on the before and after of how you've experienced the changing climate and use the value of nostalgia to do that, like I did, talking about growing up in Kamloops, how it wasn't too smoky, even though it's a place that burns, and now it's super smoky where I live in a place that doesn't burn. You need to make it people-centered, so you don't talk about, the animals and trees, talk about you or someone you love and your personal experience, and make sure you're naming your feelings. I think I used words like, I felt terrified, scared as a parent, I couldn't protect my child. So you have to actually say the feelings you're feeling. And then if you have cognitive dissonance, which we all do, name it and resolve it. So you can show people how to do that. I said, it feels too late, but we still got to move forward. Better late than never. So these key elements is what we wanted our canvassers, and we learned we needed to do to model in our story. So then we could try to draw this out of the folks we were talking to on the doors. And so our script structure, we started with that 0 to 10 scale. Where do you stand on this policy issue? And then we would share the story of pollution getting better in the community and acknowledge that this company, this single company town, has really benefited from the mining and the smelting that has happened there. And that's okay. And then we would segue into say, now the challenge is climate change. We would share our personal story and then draw out their story that hit those marks of the different pieces that needed to be in it. Then we'd say, we think we need this specific clean energy policy. What's on your mind now? And let them process what was outstanding. And then ask them that scale question again. Where did they stand? To see if we'd been able to help them resolve any of their internal conflict. And then we would ask them if they would add their name in support of this, so we could show that to City Council to show there was enough people that actually wanted this. And before I tell you the results of how that worked, so that was our script. Then we needed to go recruit volunteers to have these conversations at the scale we needed. And I showed this slide because there's a little juicy nugget in here that people always get excited about. But we really leaned in hard on existing volunteer and supporter relationships we had at the organization. We're an organization that's 29 years old, so we're deep roots in the community. We also leveraged our personal relationships. So between the two of those, it was almost 50% of our volunteers. We did some pitches, so went into classrooms or community groups and made the case for what we were doing and why we wanted their support to come join us and how it could be effective. And then the fourth most powerful recruitment tactic we used was dating apps. This was during the pandemic. We kicked off January 2020, so we had to do a lot of pivots. And I remember reading an article from the Elizabeth Warren campaign, hearing about someone using dating apps, being really explicit about recruiting, not to try to date someone, but to try to get volunteers. And that was really successful. And then we tried a whole bunch of other things that worked or didn't work. But that's where we got our volunteers from. And we got better at recruiting and retaining our volunteers using the FAB model, which is an exciting innovation that deep canvassing has brought to us, where you go through a specific structure to bring people along, much like a deep canvas script, and get them to actually show up and process their fear about showing up to deep canvas and knocking on doors. So all to say, yeah, we got a lot better at recruiting and retaining our volunteers as our campaign went on. And then we offered skill building series, either during our deep canvases or separately, to bring people in and help them get better at storytelling, help them get better at asking curious questions to guide people through their dissonance, to help draw out stories. And then we just had our basic online as well, 101, come join us, get a deep canvas training. And if you can't knock doors, come virtually knock doors and make phone calls. So we built the skills of our volunteer canvassers. And we had a big impact. Because it was the first script done on climate, there were 60 iterations. We took our time, we worked with New Conversation Initiative, and we got there. We had over 1,100 conversations, 800 of them, almost 800 went through that scale, both times, 0 to 10 at the beginning and end, so we could measure our impact. Took 800 hours, so it was about 1 conversation per hour. And we moved about 500 residents through those to take action along with some of the other supporter recruitment we were doing in the community. And it changed the community narrative. Talking about climate change and trail today is very different than it was 4 years ago. It's a much easier conversation. Talking about clean energy solutions, it's totally different. And all to say, on the door, we had a persuasion rate of 40%. So that means more than 1 in 3 people were changing their minds and moving up that scale. And the outcome was, last year on April 25th, the City of Trail committed to the 100% renewable energy transition. So it was a big victory, and we'd worked hard on it for over 2 years. So we felt very proud of this and proud of our amazing 85 volunteers that came out. And again, in a town of 8,000, these are big numbers. The other thing we did, and that we recommend doing with the Deep Canvas, is use your communications and other tactics to be grounded in the learnings from the Deep Canvas, and take those and reinforce and amplify the Deep Canvas messages that are moving people to shift the wider community narrative. So we have a little kind of summary here that you'll get in the slide deck of some of the different learnings that you can take from the script and apply to your strategic communications right now to help create that narrative shift in a very personalized way. Oops. And we also created a solutions journalism project called Living Here. And if Steve, you wouldn't mind putting that link in the chat for people, but here we write articles, we make some videos, and we try to take relatable subjects to the audience. We're trying to move and help tell their story around what's at stake for them and what the solution is in their minds. So people have more ideas of what's reinforcing those types of things in their community. And our overall theory of change is, if we deep canvass middle voters in key geographies, then we can create lasting support for climate solutions, because deep canvassing is proven to be the most effective persuasion tactic that lasts the longest and creates belief change that voters can be mobilized to vote on. This is my child, the one who has asthma. Hi, Barstow. You can say hi to everyone. There's over 400 people you're saying hi to right now.
Over 400?
Yes. Would you mind going back out with Maya right now?
Can I please
Excuse me 1 second.
While Montana and Barstow are navigating their family moment, I'll also say that we have dropped a link in the chat to Neighbours United's upcoming volunteer canvases.
Thanks, Steve, and thanks, everyone. So I just wanted to kind of end with sharing a little bit about where we're at now. So we have a bunch of projects that we're doing right now, different deep canvas issues, different places, and we've got partnerships going on. So one of the big pieces for us is we want to be running our own deep canvas campaigns to keep learning, to keep being on the ground. There's a number of my amazing coworkers here that are knocking on doors every single week with teams of volunteers. Shout out to all the Neighbours United staff and volunteers on the call. And then we also really want other groups, other grassroots groups who can do organizing, to have this tool in their toolkit so they can be able to win different policy moments when they need to be winning. So we piloted our first partnership with a group called Alberta Talks in Calgary, Alberta. It's an oil and gas province. We did this in the suburbs, and we were talking with residents about ending tax breaks to oil and gas companies. And here they got their script iterated, they had a great volunteer program, and they had a 38% persuasion rate. Right now, we're running a deep canvas in a suburban community called Coquitlam in British Columbia in the Lower Mainland, where I am right now, around supporting zero carbon building code. So that's new buildings being built the most energy efficient as possible with no new gas hookups. And this script has a 45% persuasion rate. In mill towns across British Columbia that are traditionally forestry dependent, small places, we're trying to build support for a new law in BC that makes ecosystem health the top priority for the way forestry is managed. And all of these, there's like different political reasons that these are the right policies. There's things going on the ground that make these reasonable to be working on. And here we have a 35% persuasion rate. In Newfoundland, we're getting a new deep canvas off the ground and building a team there. And we're going to be deep canvassing around oil and gas exploration and trying to change the conversation about where energy comes from. And we're going to be focusing on the suburban areas of St. John's, the capital. And we're just starting our script development, and we're hiring. So if you live in Newfoundland, or if you want to move to Newfoundland and deep canvas, come let me know. And in all of those different Canadian ones, we've had key learnings around making sure we're acknowledging folks' identities, having it be okay that their communities have benefited from resource extraction. That's okay. We don't need to shame them for it, like we have done as an environmental movement in the past. If we're talking about climate change as something that moves people, making it really personal, the way I shared my story, making sure you hit those points. And sometimes we don't need to talk about climate change. Sometimes we just need to talk about the value of unfairness. And so, for example, in Alberta, people didn't know the extent of oil and gas companies profiteering. And meanwhile, affordability is something they're struggling with, and systems are letting them down. And the oil and gas companies are getting subsidized tax breaks. So giving people that chance to process all that can help people move through their conflict as well. And then meanwhile, down in the US, where a lot of you are today, as Eric mentioned at the beginning, we have this amazing challenge and piece of research around the 6 Americas. And not only are the cautious movable, I think the concerned are movable, I think the disengaged are movable. And that's who we're thinking about when we focus on deep canvassing in the US. How can we move these folks up to be alarmed and then mobilize the alarmed to do the different things on the different policy issues? And so right now we have a partnership with Ohio Citizen Action around their solar siting campaign. There's this state bill that let local control happen around if folks want to move forward with renewable energy projects, so kind of the opposite of what's going on in Michigan. And as a result, some of the local counties have been banning solar projects or other renewable projects or considering it. So they have a goal of these 7,000 megawatts of solar that's already grandfathered in, but we need to get it across the finish line for the clean energy transition. And these are happening in rural and small town places. So going in and having listening-based conversations with residents and trying to understand what's going on and helping them walk through their cognitive dissonance and make up their own minds is the goal of what we're trying to do. And so we almost have a final script ready. They have an amazing group of folks on the ground, and hopefully very soon we'll be ready to start launching the volunteer program. So if you're in Ohio, get in touch with Ohio Citizen Action and you can join their team. We also supported a group in Maine in a very light way. Back in June, they ran a campaign, Pine Tree Power. It was a ballot initiative that just happened in November, and they used deep canvassing in a few places. And then we did a mini script iteration. I know Steve helped coach them as well. They launched their volunteer program in June, along with a whole bunch of other tactics. They had a 48% persuasion rate. They were outspent 37-1, and their ballot measure failed, and they learned a lot. But the interesting thing that they're seeing, and some of the debriefs they've been doing, is the places where they use deep canvassing the state, they won those places. So, you know, it's a tool in the toolbox. Statewide campaigns are hard, but something to think about. There's something there, and there's going to be a lot of cool learnings from that to think about moving forward. So all to say, we should probably be thinking about deep canvassing and focused climate and energy campaigns in the US and Canada and other places, because how else are we going to stop polarization and build lasting support? We have this amazing tool in the toolbox, deep canvassing, that myself at Neighbours United and New Conversation Initiative and Steve, we want to train people on. We want to support you. We want to figure out these strategic partnerships. So we're ready to work together. So let's figure out how we can use this tool when it's needed in strategic places. So I will pass it back to Steve to share a little bit about the Deep Canvassing Institute. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, just one final salute to Montana and the incredible work that she and her team have been doing. And just on that last note around training opportunities, wanted to just express that our organization, so the New Conversation Initiative is an organization that we run that helps people build deep canvas programs, works in depth with organizations and program leads who are really trying to seriously build programs. And we would love to talk to you if you're in that space where you're thinking about how to launch a deep canvas in an organizational, institutional capacity. The New Conversation Initiative is available, but also kind of more broadly in partnership with People's Action, we run a training program called the Deep Canvas Institute. So if you are an individual who is just interested to get more involved and a deeper understanding of this work, start to figure out how you can have these conversations in your own world, in your own life, we have free trainings that we run that are for you, great opportunities for you to get your feet wet in this work, to deepen your understanding of how to do it, to start building these skills, to be in community with other folks that are trying to do this. We would love to invite you to join for our next rounds of training that are going to be coming up. We have an intro to deep canvassing January 23rd next year from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern. Then we have our next full, like, how to have a deep canvas conversation training, which is a 3-session training that's really powerful, really compelling, really participatory. That's coming up February 6th, 7th, and 10th. These are all online Zoom trainings, and you can sign up at the links that Montana is dropping in chat, or you can always email hello@deepcanvas.org for more details about the trainings or to get involved. And with that, I will pass it to Josh so we can have some question time.
Thank you both, Steve and Montana, so much. This was a really, really interesting webinar, and Steve and Montana shared a bunch of great resources to their websites and their upcoming trainings. These are in the chat, and also I believe these will be in a follow-up email that will be sent out to all the attendees, as well as a recording of this talk. So we have about 10 minutes left for questions, and one of the first questions that folks have been asking is just a bit of like almost disbelief. Like, do people actually have these conversations? These are very strange conversations. They're 10 minutes long. You have to be incredibly vulnerable. Who are the almost weird people having these conversations? Or maybe they aren't that weird. From your experiences, Steve and Montana, just like who's willing to open the door to a complete stranger and have a 10-minute long conversation?
I would, yeah. So this is the question I had the first time I got recruited as a very scared volunteer to go out and try to do this. It's the question everyone has walking into this. Are people going to talk to me? Are people going to talk to the canvassers in my program? And the thing I'm here to report is that, like, yes, this seems so countercultural and different, and so different from what we think of when we think of Canvas interactions, someone coming to our door and we're like, they're kind of in a rush and we're kind of in a rush and we feel awkward and we want it to be over with as quickly as possible. But what's so different about deep Canvas conversations, either at the doors or on the phones, where this works very powerfully as well, is that they almost right out of the gate buck people's expectations. And almost right out of the gate, we are expressing a curiosity about people and an interest in what they actually feel and their complicated feelings in their life. And the second we do that, it's so different from what people get to experience either in Canvas political interactions or just life in general. Like, we so rarely have the opportunity of people being genuinely curious about us and our lives and our complicated feelings on an issue, that it pulls people in, and people lean into this opportunity and open up and engage in ways that we're just not expecting that they will do. So our experience has been that contact rates tend to be as high or higher than other kinds of outreach programs in the field, and that people's experience of it is really engaging.
One thing that's really shocking to some of the data side is, the hardest part is getting someone to open the door, and that's true of whatever type of conversation you're having. But conditional on someone opening the door and starting that conversation, 90+% of people have a complete deep Canvas conversation. So it's bizarre, but I think, as Steve was saying, people really desire these types of conversations. Another question that folks had was they were really impressed by Jackson's story and Montana by your story, but a lot of people care about LGBTQ plus rights, but are not a member of the LGBTQ plus community, or they care a lot about climate change and pollution, but they don't have that same personal story like you shared, Montana. They don't have a child suffering from asthma or something similar. So how can you be a successful deep canvasser if you don't have a personal story like that?
Such a good question. And I think what we've learned is, if you spend some time digging and you work within our program with our team and we help you dig, you do have a personal stake story. You just don't know you have it. Specifically around climate impacts, we are starting to experience them in North America in a way that people can name. That said, when we started working with our friends in Calgary, the climate impact story wasn't landing the same way, because the time we were doing that, they hadn't had the intense smoke in a regular way like we had in rural British Columbia. The heat dome that happened a few years ago wasn't experienced in the same way that they could name. They aren't seeing the regularness that we are in some of our rural areas in British Columbia. So we actually leaned into an unfairness story where we helped people find their lived experience in struggling with affordability. So some people, even if they are doing well financially, they know someone who's struggling, maybe their niece or nephew or someone close to them. And so by finding their lived experience in that struggle and then contrasting that with the profiting of the big oil and gas companies and their CEOs, and then how the systems are letting people down, healthcare, education, and how money could be so much better spent in those places, we still get people out of fact land and into their feelings land, their lived experience. Where people can move. So I think it's just a matter of spending some time and being like, we're not going to get it right the first time, and that's okay, but we can coach each other through our training programs to help people find that story or a set of stories that can be used in different deep canvases.
And one of the things that works quite well is I could share Montana's story. I could say, let me tell you a story about my friend Montana and her daughter. And even though it's not my daughter, she's not my daughter, I can still relate that very personal story. Or I could talk about a friend who is LGBTQ+, or a friend who is an undocumented immigrant. So we find pretty consistently in these types of programs that members who are from the affected community or not, or members who have a personal story or are sharing someone else's personal story as a friend, as an ally, both of those can be incredibly powerful. One question that came up quite a bit was about scale. I mean, the climate emergency is a timely emergency. And these conversations take a lot of time and they take a lot of effort. What strategies are there to adjust the scale of the deep canvassing to address the crisis we're facing? And Steve, you mentioned one briefly about how these deep canvas conversations work over phones as well, but are there other types of learnings from deep canvassing that can be used to address other types of conversations, other types of ways to educate individuals? What are the bigger picture takeaways from this deep canvassing work?
Maybe I'll take a quick start on this, Montana, and then pass to you. I mean, part of the thing, one of my answers to this is that deep canvassing is scalable in a really profoundly big way. Because I was part of a statewide campaign in 2012 in Minnesota where 14,000 volunteers ended up having these conversations with 220,000 voters, 20,000 of whom reported that they changed their mind as a result of the conversation. And that was a really significant part of winning a statewide campaign in a Midwest state on an LGBTQ rights issue where we'd never won. So on the one hand, it's possible, could say a lot about the kinds of resources and time and energy that goes into doing a statewide campaign at that scale. But regardless of what scale you're working at, and I think Montana made some great points about the kind of ways to think about focus of the work to be most strategic. The idea that taking more time at the doors is a loss of time, taking the time to listen is a loss, is I think a giant misnomer. We often have these false incentives around big numbers of like, we got to show how many doors we knocked on, we got to show how many dials we made, we got to show how many people we interacted with. But we can burn an enormous amount of our energy and resources and movement doing a lot of work that actually doesn't yield much, that doesn't make an impact. Whereas we know very clearly from the data that if we do this listening and story sharing and take that extra bit of time at the doors, not only does it not really change our contact rate all that much, we can change people in a lasting way. And we can also invest in the volunteers and canvassers who are doing that work to have that capacity to do deeper work over a longer arc that will last years and multiple cycles and multiple campaigns. And those are all, I think, things that point to the potential here that actually kind of put some of the lie to the sense that, oh, if I take too long to listen, I'm going to miss out on something. But Montana, I'm curious what you think.
A couple of thoughts. One is like, what other choice do we have? There's places where we need to persuade people. We need to connect deeply. And what we've been doing for the last 30 years hasn't been working. So when we need to do that, we should use this tool. And when we don't need to. When we can just identify supporters and turn them out and get the policy we need, great, let's do that. But there's places we can't. So I think it's about, we do need to get the numbers, and that's about resources. So my wish this holiday season is that more resources go into deep canvassing on climate, environmental issues, as well as social justice issues over the next in the next year and the coming years, and that we can take a longer term view of what winning means and what building a resilient movement and investing in people to have these conversations in their communities and being invested in communities, not just like drop resources in, win an election and get out. That's not sustainable. That doesn't build a movement. So I hope we can rethink investment as a community and use this tool when we need to use it.
Thank you so much for that answer, Steve and Montana. We are at 1 o'clock, so I'm going to turn it back over to Eric to wrap us up. And there were a ton of great questions, and unfortunately we couldn't get to all of them, but really some great Q&A. Thank you, Steve and Montana.
Thank you, Josh, for moderating the conversation. Montana and Steve, for your thoughtful insights. We'll send everyone a follow-up email after this event with the recording and information on the next event of our fall speaker series, which is next Friday, December 8th at noon to 1 p.m. Eastern time, where we hope you'll join us for a panel on climate change in Puerto Rico. Have a great weekend, everyone.